Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
All right, welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am the host of one out of the two, Ethan, along with my main man, Brice Lewis. How are you doing, Brice, today on this nice evening?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. Can't really complain too much. Just doing what I can on a day-to-day basis and just taking every day, one day at a time. Ethan, how about you, man? How are you, man?
I've been good. I've been definitely soaking up all the sports that I can, the ones that are playing currently. So I've been keeping up with our Atlanta Braves here in the A-Town in Atlanta, Georgia. And, they've been doing okay. And, of course, I'm a Pelicans fan. If our football listeners don't know, I come on your basketball podcast sometimes, and I try to give my best level-headed Pelicans takes about Zion and everybody else. And as you can see, on a Monday, that is August the 3rd, I believe. Today is the 3rd, and I am still in lots of pain. So nothing has changed since the bubble started and ended. The Pelicans still remain to find its way of giving me number 2 sources of pain when it comes to sports. You already know number 1 source of pain is the Saints, and they continuously try to give me more pain. Every time they touch any sort of media market, any sort of storyline, headline, game, they will give me pain. So it's only just sports is back, so it's good. I missed the pain. I missed having the pain in my heart.
Oh man, it's okay, man. See, the pain's gonna all turn into happiness one day. If y'all win another Super Bowl, that pain is gonna be worth it.
I don't know, man. What I saw in sports in the last couple of days has been really, really dramatic, to say the least. That Pelicans game was the worst by far. The LA Clippers beat us in 2 minutes. The game was over in 2 minutes within the first quarter. It was that bad.
Oh man, it happens sometimes, man. It happens. It's okay, bro. You can bounce back.
When Pat Beverly is going 70% from 3, you're not having a good time.
Oh, true. I mean, hey, man, like I said, bro, y'all can still bounce back and control your destiny.
All right. Yeah, I guess it's fair. Have you been, how's basketball for you? I know you cover it, so you got to be consuming it nonstop. Every game, every chance you get, you got to be in front of that bubble. You got to be in front of that screen.
I mean, it's been good, man. It's been interesting watching the games. It's just good seeing basketball back here, really. Seeing all the teams come back kind of feels like a different season, to be honest with you, because it's just like, you have that pause, and now we're getting it back, and it feels like we're having this miniature season. And now, I did my other podcast earlier, and I kind of just quick hit point said that since everybody just started back, everybody fresh, so no one can complain of James Harden playing 82 games. Now he can go ahead and play and do what he does like on a normal basis, and that could change some things in the Western Conference potentially. But I feel like every team in every league needs that one team that can kind of shake some things up, and I think Houston could be that. So we'll have to see, man.
Yeah, man. I think every team in the Western Conference I think every team in the bubble, for the most part, except for a few select ones, got better. And unfortunately for the Lakers, I feel like this is just a small bit. We won't last too much longer on basketball. But I think the Lakers got a little bit worse, don't you think? Because they have no guards. Like, I was watching Dame Lillard and CJ McCollum tear up the Celtics, even though they lost. But the Lakers don't want to see that backcourt at all. They don't want to see any backcourt that good in the first round. They don't want to see that. So I gotta believe they're hoping to see Ja Morant. They don't want to see, they want to see 15-minute Zion, or they want to see the Spurs, but they don't want to see that. They don't want to see a Portland team with a lot of really quality players in the eighth seed, because that is going to be tough.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I guess, man, we've been spending a lot of time talking about basketball. I bet our listeners probably listening like, what? Is this a basketball podcast? Like, no, it's not a basketball podcast, guys. You know, you're just chatting it up. That's all it is.
Listen, we gotta squeeze it in every now and again, you know. Gotta pick your brain. But really, you know, we talk football here, and we have a lot of football to get on with. And the first thing we got to talk about is people opting out. So it's no secret that the NFL is allowing players to opt out if they choose to. And we know a lot of big time players and a lot of players that may not be well aware of in the popular football, you know, in the space. So if you're not a hardcore football fan, you probably might not know some of these players. But right now I'm going to list from every team some names who have decided to opt out of the 2020 NFL season so far. So from the Baltimore Ravens, we have Andre Smith, and he resigned they resigned the offensive lineman for a 1-year, $1 million deal in February, but he's going to sit out. DeAnthony Thomas, you know, Oregon standout guy, you know, early 2010s, speed demon, Oregon, Nike. He was one of the big faces there. He's opting out. Buffalo star Lou Tulele sitting out. EJ Gaines is also sitting out for Buffalo. Carolina, you have Jordan Mack sitting out. He was an undrafted rookie linebacker, and he's the first one for the Panthers. Eddie Goldman for Chicago is opting out. The Bengals have 2 players opting out. They have Isaiah Prince, and they have Josh Tupou. Tupou, I believe that's how it's pronounced. Apologies if that is not what it is. Cleveland, Drew Forbes and Drake Dorbeck opting out. Marcus Candy from Dallas and Stephen Guidry. And Jasmine Olwale. Denver Broncos, Kyle Pico, Jawan James. Denver has John Atkins and Geronimo Allison, who they just got in free agency this past year. Devin Funchess, who the Green Bay Packers just got as well, opting out. Houston, Andy Vanderos is opting out. Kansas City, Laurent Duvernay Tardif, he's opting out, and he's going to be doing something crazy. So, well, it's not crazy. He has his MD, so he's going out to help out in the pandemic instead of playing football. Very admirable things. And of course, for the fantasy players out there, if you listen to my fantasy football show on Fridays, you know we talked about extensively Damian Williams. He opted out. So now the hype train is all for Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now. So you know where that's headed. The Jaguars have Al Woods and Lorente McCray. The Rams, Chandler Brewer. Minnesota, Michael Pierce. And New England has a lot of names. So Najee Turan, Danny Viatal, Marcus Cannon, Brandon Bolden, and Donta Hightower, which is a pretty big name. Patrick Chung, big name. Marquise Lee is a big name too. And Matt LaCois. So there's a lot of people just opting out. And then the Saints have Cole Wick and Jason Vanderlaan, who both are tight ends. So good thing half their quarterbacks can play the position of tight end anyway. The New York Giants have Nate Soldier and Damari Scott. The New York Jets, Leo Koloamatangi. Man, that was the name. Koloamatangi. There we go. CJ Mosley opts out after also being injured all last season too. So he opts out for family concerns. Philadelphia Eagles Marquise Goodwin has opted out. Seattle Chad Warmack. Tennessee, Anthony McKinney, and the Washington football team's Caleb Brantley has opted out. So that's all we know so far who have decided to sit down for the season and not play. And of course, I'm sure there might be more to come near the tail end of the end period of the, opting out, because I believe it ends, Wednesday?
Yeah, that's where they're. Well, they didn't have an official deadline, but that's the deadline I think they're going to put. Because I think since so many players are opting out, I have this feeling they're trying to put the deadline as soon as possible. Because if they give a longer deadline, I guess maybe more players could opt out. So maybe NFL is trying to do some control here. It's like, listen, if you really want to get out of here, you better make a decision now.
Right.
But yeah, Wednesday looks like the day.
It seems like the NFL and the NFLPA agreed that the opt-out deadline would happen 7 days after the official revision. So that means that it could be as late as August 9th, but however, the NFL decided to ignore that agreement. So they are trying to get the window to be shortened as soon as Wednesday at the latest. So we'll see what happens, but a lot of players aren't that happy about it. So Patriots safety and captain Devin McCourty was speaking with people, and he took his time during a brief video call with reporters on Sunday to express his displeasure with the NFL's handling of the situation. He says, "I think that it's an absolute joke that the NFL is changing the opt-out period, mainly because they don't want to see guys continue to opt out." McCourty said that I'm sure that they're shocked about how many guys have opted out, but it's the same thing as if when we sign the CBA sometimes, some of the things that we think are good sometimes backfire. And we have rookies who are locked in long-term contracts and tagged. You guys don't think we would love to change that, but we can't. And that's the point of signing an agreement. And he says that he thinks it's terrible and he thinks that it's BS that the league has changed the date because Monday will be our first day in the building. So to try and make that decision about something other than a virtual meeting is a joke. So some players are voicing their opinions on this whole opt-out thing. And I think a lot of people are kind of shocked about how vocal these NFL players have been about the whole opt-out process, this whole COVID-19 thing, because to be honest, NFL players typically aren't the first to really speak out on anything, if you know what I mean. Like, it's usually not their forte to be extremely vocal about stuff. They're very close-knit, and they kind of wait and see a lot of the times, especially from an NFL standpoint, as we've seen just what happens to those who speak out. And we'll be talking about that more later on in the college space. But speaking out doesn't always solve all your problems in the NFL, as we've seen in previous other situations that we could point to.
Yeah, pretty much. And, just, I mean, obviously they're in a situation where they have to speak out as well because of everything that's going on. Because I'm sure there's a lot of NFL players that are watching what's going on in baseball, because baseball's at the center of it right now. Because we just had another team, I think the Cardinals got 14 people who just tested positive today. And I think there was a report is because they all went to a casino. So obviously that, and the point is that the thing is that with MLB, their players still have the freedom to do whatever they want. You just hope they're responsible. Obviously, we see what's happening in basketball. They're in a bubble, and so far it's working. Football, they're not going to be in a bubble, and they're giving them the same rights as baseball players. You can do what you want, but just know COVID's going on, so be careful. But players are still going to want to go out, do stuff, go places. And so for me, it just feels like players are probably like seeing it and thinking, man, is it smart for me to really do this? Because I feel like also certain players are going to be responsible when needed. It's just, if football starts having mass coronavirus cases and tests, they could maybe end up in a position where they might have to end up canceling the season potentially, which I'm sure nobody really wants. So it's I'm sure that's why players are going ahead and trying to say something about it now, because they're just like, listen, there's some concern here. We need to let it be known as concern, and we need to talk to our fellow players and discuss what's going on.
Yeah, and real quickly, that baseball stuff is really, really scary because they don't have any fans. No fans are allowed in arenas and stadiums for baseball. And not to say that the fans would be the direct problem to COVID-19 and players getting it and going through locker rooms and stuff like that. Of course, I wouldn't say that, but you would think that having fans is one of your biggest worries, and you would think that your players would be able to, stay the course and want to play out the season the best way they can. But unfortunately, that's not always the case, as we see a whole casino. Like, then you start to think about how things like the NBA bubble isn't always 100% safe. We saw Lou Williams, literally it was all jokes, but he really could have compromised the whole league for basically some chicken wings, quote unquote, at Magic City. Like, this is the thing that people were really upset about, because he kind of made it seem like it wasn't a big deal. And now look at the Cardinals, because if this is the case, if they really went to a casino, look, this is the product of choices and the consequences of said choices. So I know the NFL's got to be sweating, because I would be like, what are you going to tell these players to say, like, oh, they can't go here, there, and the third? And what are you going to get them to do? It's not like you can take them to Disney World and have all these things for them to do. They're literally going to be sitting in hotels watching film all day or playing video games till they literally pass out. Like, these are grown men. Like, they feel like they need something else to do. But we're going to take our first break, and coming back, we're going to talk more NFL news topics and other football discussions here at the GSMC.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we're back here at the GSMC Football Podcast, and me and Brice are still locked in and ready to go to talk about all things football, NFL, college, XFL possibly, and so much more. As real quick, the XFL got purchased by Dwayne Johnson and a whole bunch of other financial backers, so the XFL will return at some point, and it was only for $15 million. Can you believe it?
Not bad. It's not bad, man.
I thought it'd be worth more as a product, but I guess not.
I mean, it just started, so I mean, you can't. I mean, what happened? I mean, I know ESPN backed out of something with them. I think they backed out of the deal or whatever. They ripped up the deal. So we'll have to see what The Rock can do with it. What his image of the XFL will be, because obviously they were bankrupt. So now that The Rock's here, they're not bankrupt anymore. So whenever things get safe again, I don't know. I feel like The Rock is going to add some spunk to it. So you never know, man. You never know. The Rock's out here doing a lot of different things. And
normally, I wouldn't feel bad for someone like Vince McMahon, but you got to admit, they really did try. They tried really hard to try to get the XFL off the ground, and then COVID
hit, man.
it literally just obliterated it. I'm just like, how unlucky can you be? Like, it was going down in ratings and stuff. We knew that, and it wasn't the best product on the field, but it was something, and it was trying to be legitimate. It was the first season, and we all know it takes some time for stuff to build up hype and get players, and we were really thinking about years down the line what the XFL possibly could be, and then it literally got two-pieced to oblivion. Golly. But it's, there's still hope. So XFL fans, DC Defender fans, Cardell Jones fans, you guys still may have some hope. But we're going to talk about some Lamar Jackson. So Brice, what do you got for us, man?
Well, obviously, training camp's coming up. So people are having access, media's having access to players, ask questions, interviews. So Lamar Jackson was interviewed, and they basically brought up his playoff difficulties. Obviously, Lamar Jackson's 0-2 in the playoffs so far in his young career. And he mentioned that he's sick of it. He's tired of going home. He's tired of not having sustained success. And so obviously we understand how important playoff victories are in terms of a quarterback position. in the NFL. I mean, we have a lot of history, like Peyton. Remember, Peyton Manning didn't have a lot of success in the playoffs early in his career. All right. And then some people may say overall he wasn't the greatest playoff quarterback ever. But, you know, Lamar's still young. He's still entering basically his second full year as the starter. And, you know, one question it brings up to me is, do we put too much weight potentially on playoff victories for quarterbacks? Like, obviously it's important to win. It's important to, you know, win a Super Bowl, but do we put too much on it? If Lamar Jackson ended his career as, like, let's say he went like 5-7 or 5-8 in his playoff career throughout his entire career, would we look at that and say, well, since he went 5-8, he was not that good? But let's say he put up great numbers. He won a couple more MVPs. Maybe one of those years he won a Super Bowl. And I mean, you know, like, are we putting too much on just quarterbacks winning playoff games? Because everybody's in a different situation. You got to think about it. Sometimes you're just maybe somewhere at the wrong time. You know, we can't diminish the person's talent and what he's done on the field. You know, like, do we put too much weight on playoff wins, even though that is an important part of being a quarterback?
Well, there's only two positions, I say, kind of asterisks. There are only two, I guess, jobs and positions that are solely focused on numbers like wins and losses. That's coaches and quarterbacks. You don't hear anybody talking about Christian McCaffrey's playoff losses or playoff wins or anybody else really that it matters, right? They know, like, how many Super Bowls they have, of course. That counts. Like, when people talk about who's the best wide receiver of all time, well, it's gotta be Jerry Rice. He has like 5 Super Bowl rings or 4, however he has. Or they look at, you know, Randy Moss and be like, well, how much does Randy have? And then they go into the stats, individuals. Like, football can be really individualistic at times. However, for quarterbacks, it's to the umpteenth level, right? So here's my thing about playoff success for quarterbacks, especially young ones. It all depends on how they start, how they progress, and the context of their team at the time, right? So when people look at Russell Wilson's playoff record, you have to put some time asterisk around it because, yeah, he did win, but for half of those playoff games, for the most part in the beginning of his career, it wasn't like he was the one winning those games. That defense in Marshawn Lynch were literally incredible. They had one of the best defenses of the last 10 years, and they carried that young quarterback to have success later on in his career and to win a Super Bowl, right? And to go to the Super Bowl back to back, right? And then ever since then, we know what Russell Wilson is, and he happens to be, in my opinion, the second best quarterback in the league, pound for pound. But other than that, if you were to judge Russell Wilson based off of playoff performances, you'd think he's probably one of the greatest ever. And he might end up being at some point. But there is context. It's just like Tom Brady. When Tom Brady first came in the league, yeah, he started to win Super Bowls and he was going to the playoffs, and we all know the records and things like that. But in the beginning, Tom Brady was not the Tom Brady we saw even 5 years ago when he was from 2007 onward, where he was undisputed the best quarterback in the league for the most part, besides Peyton Manning. And, you know, they had their duels and battles. But other than that, you know, playoff success is very relative to what was happening during the time. Are we really going to count against Lamar Jackson the first playoff loss? Are we really? And then we looked and see how he improved from year 2 onward, his first full season. And yeah, the playoff loss to Tennessee was not the greatest. But a lot of the numbers from that game are kind of skewed because it wasn't like he was the one dropping some passes. It wasn't like he was the one where the ball was getting knocked up in the air from somebody trying to catch the ball and then he gets picked off. Like, there was a lot of fluky stuff that happened in that game. Now, of course, he did force a lot
to tackle Derrick Henry.
That's also true, right? These things matter. No one talks about the linebacker that may have a good career, but they look at his playoff losses and they think, oh, well, maybe he's not that good. The quarterback is the only position in sports, really, in football, I should say, the only position in football that gets it like everybody else. So the quarterback is judged just as harshly as a point guard in the NBA who's been in the league for 7 years. Like, Devin Booker and Lamar Jackson probably get equal levels of scrutiny when it comes to success because they're both electric and they're both really talented young players. Lamar Jackson has made it to the playoffs 2 times. Devin Booker has not made it to the playoffs, and people think that he can't win because he doesn't have enough. Like, he's not built to win. We don't know what Devin Booker is just yet. We just know that he can put up a lot of numbers in the regular season, though, and maybe that's what people feel about Lamar currently, but I think that is unfair for now. And yeah, at a certain level, playoff success can be a little bit weird, but it does matter, though.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think one thing also we have to remember here is that like I said earlier, sometimes it just depends on the situation you're in, you know? Like, think about what you said about Russell Wilson. He had the greatest defensive running game. Then think about after he lost both of those things, he became a better player. But the team wasn't as good as it was then, so he had to start carrying them. So you have to give him credit for taking less talent and getting them to the playoffs. I mean, his record is 9-6 so far in his career. Obviously, a lot of that was from early in his career because a lot of time nowadays, he may either get one and done or he may win one playoff game. I mean, why not? Just really depends, you know?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because we've seen this in many other different types of sports scenarios. LeBron carried Cleveland 2 separate years in 2006, 07. He took Cleveland and dragged them to the finals and got beat down by the Spurs. But nobody cares about him dragging them to the finals because he lost, right? No one cares about Cleveland in 2018 getting dragged to the finals literally by a thread and getting beat down by Golden State because he still lost. Nobody cares. Like, or at least nobody who like is not a LeBron supporter cares, right? If you are a avid LeBron supporter, you're using that evidence to fight for LeBron's honor. But in most people's eyes who don't really care to one way or the other, they're not looking at playoff. Like, I'm sure playoff wins do factor in at some point when you're getting down to the nitty gritty of comparing player to player. But for the overarching sense of people's careers, it's championships or nothing. And right now, Lamar doesn't have a championship yet. And maybe I feel like it's unfair to think that Lamar needs to be producing championships at this point. Although this year might be a little bit more important if they do play, of course, caveat. If they do play and the season is successful, so to speak, we do have to consider that Lamar and the Ravens are as close to being a favorite to go to the Super Bowl as anybody else. Granted, we know that they are in the same conference as the Chiefs, who just won the Super Bowl. But the Ravens and the Chiefs could really go – you could flip a coin and pick which one should come out the AFC. At this point, they're both stacked.
Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it difficult. Like, you never know. What if Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson meet like 8 times and Patrick Mahomes ended up winning 6 of those? We're going to somehow look at, and let's say and we're talking about playoffs, not regular season playoffs. Let's just say like some part of the playoffs. We're going to sit here and say, well, you know, Lamar Jackson lost all those games in the playoffs, but we have to remember he had a dynasty to deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. You can't. You have to think about those types of things. You know, it's not like they didn't have a dynasty. The AFC was wide open for a decade and he just couldn't win. It was like, you know, you had a team that was pretty much like, you know, great. Like, think about for the last 20 years for the most part. Think about the Patriots. They've been dominant throughout most of, you know, well, and we can just focus on this past decade. Since I believe they've won 2 championships this decade. Or I think 2 or 3. I can't remember how much. I think maybe it's 3. But
they beat the Eagles, they beat the Falcons, and they beat someone else. Can't remember.
Okay, so yeah, so I guess my thing is that you may just have that team that just is just there, and think about those teams that may have won like 4 championships in a decade. That's 4 years that went to one team. Now there were other great players during that decade and other great quarterbacks. who were good enough to win, but they just ran into that. We can even bring it to basketball. Think about in the 90s with the Bulls. You know how many great players there were in the 90s. Jordan was there. Doesn't mean those players are good. Doesn't mean they're not great. Well, Jordan was there. The Bulls were great. I mean, sometimes that happens. So I think we shouldn't put too much on it with Lamar. I think we just got to give him a chance to continue to get better. Because honestly, listen, let's say those 2 times I said he beat Patrick Mahomes. What if those 2 years he won Super Bowls? He got 2 Super Bowl rings. I mean, what we going to say? Oh, he has no playoff success? I mean, he did the best what he could. He still had stuff. He has hardware. He has accolades. So it's really just about when the year comes and when your time comes, taking advantage of it. And then we will always appreciate what you have done throughout your career overall. Because, listen, it's hard to win in this league. So I don't feel like we should be judging quarterbacks quickly on winning success, especially as young as Lamar Jackson is.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the whole Peyton Manning thing. Peyton Manning is known as the greatest regular season quarterback ever. And if you look at playoff success, Tom Brady had his number a lot of the time. He still ended up with 2 Super Bowl rings. And, you know, the last one was kind of, you know, controversial because he was slinging rubber duckies for the better half of a month before he won it. But, you know, he got there and he got it done. So he got 2 Super Bowl rings, but his playoff success, if you look at it from a grand scheme of things, isn't all that special. But we understand that Peyton Manning is a Hall of Famer. We understand that Peyton Manning is one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen play the position. And if we would have just wrote off because of playoff success, who knows who would be in the Hall of Fame and who wouldn't. So that's just a whole playoff success matters, but only to a certain point because success does have an end, right? As far as the end goal is to get a championship. And if you don't reach there, you know, you got to go back to square one. So if you can get there a few times, you're already in upper echelon. You know what I mean? People play the game of football and don't win. That's just like, it's hard to win a championship. Not everybody gets one. And that's what makes sports competitive and fun. But we're going to take another break and we're going to come back talking some college football here at the GSMC. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, Brice. We're back here at the GSMC Football Podcast, and we are going to get into some college football news and things that are very noteworthy and very important and imperative in our time of football, because we really don't know what is happening. Like, I don't know what's about to go down for college football, but things are moving in motion because they have no choice. Training camp is very close to, if not already should be happening. And we're still having a lot of issues when it comes to collegiate play, as some teams are getting shut down for 2 weeks due to COVID. Other teams are still moving right on time as far as schedule is concerned. The SEC has moved their start date back 3 weeks. So now their first week is supposed to be September 26th. And we don't know if that could change, and they're not playing any non-conference games. The ACC is trying to play one non-conference game. So we're not going to get, though, the ACC-SEC rivalry games this year as far as we know, unless something changes dramatically in the next few weeks. But from my understanding, it does not look like that is going to happen. Then, of course, we have to deal with the Pac-12 right now, as players are coming together and trying to create a sense of unity within the Pac-12 and ask and negotiate with athletic directors and officials about having better COVID-19 requirements and rules and regulations, along with fighting for equality and some form of compensation. They're just packaging a whole lot of things that really should be in the full-on idea of reforming the current collegiate athletics model all into one. And they are threatening to opt out if they are not allowed to negotiate. So, Brice, I have to ask, how are you feeling about college sports currently in the realm of where we are now currently and what we need to get to in order to potentially even have a chance at a season in the next few weeks?
Well, one thing has always been this situation. Since health and players' health, and especially with college players, they're not getting paid or anything, health is on the line here. I've always felt like, especially with both the NFL and NCAA's images being tarnished or being affected by certain things that happened in the past and them not responding the right way where players can build a trust for their league, I think that it's a big deal. And sending the NCAA, obviously we know the NCAA has not been the greatest in terms of public perception, in terms of how they treat players, what they give to the student athlete, the rules they have set for student athletes, and et cetera. And this movement is just from the Pac-12 is just more about like, listen, there's a lot of uncertainty right now among us, and we need to make sure that we are going to be covered if something happens. Because I think that's the biggest thing I think players want out of any league is just, do you have my back? Will you protect us when we need you to protect us? Because you have the ability to protect us, but will you actually do it? And I think if I'm the Pac-12, I would listen. You need to take these demands seriously, and I think you need to try to work with the players to satisfy them. Because listen, this can only help you as a league if you do what the players want. Because now, at least within the Pac-12, there's more of a trust. Okay, we can get what we need to better, feel better about playing this season. If you sit here and try to resist it, deny it, try to use money as an excuse, they're going to feel like, well, you don't care about us, but you need us on the field so y'all can get money, so we're just not going to get on the field then. So none of us are going to get what we want. So, and you've seen Pac-12 players post, tweets about it, talk about them being united as one in this situation. And, listen, a couple of things, a couple of points they've hit on in the post they've posted. They've talked about ensuring future generations of college athletes will be treated fairly. They've talked about making sure that guys who are walk-ons are still going to be able to play, be able to get scholarships in the future. They've also talked about, being able to, because obviously college football players are technically prohibited from having representation while they're in college. So obviously, in terms of being asked to sign certain documents, maybe along with liability waivers or whatever, they don't have that type of representation. They want to have representation for that. If something happens with COVID, obviously remember, as a student athlete, COVID-19 isn't necessarily something that a trainer on a football team can heal you from or help you with or fix you with or whatever. COVID is something you kind of have to go outside of the team's doctors to kind of deal with. And so that would go into the medical system. And then remember, these are college players. If they have to go to the hospital and then they have medical bills, well, technically the team or the college doesn't have to pay for that. And that's another thing they're also trying to fight for. Listen, we're not trying to, you should be able to cover that. You know what I'm saying? Why should we be stuck with that? If we're putting ourselves at risk for you guys. Yeah. And, for the most part, they also, one of the last things they have is any player that feels uncomfortable with not playing during the season should not be eligible to lose a year of eligibility or their scholarship. Because obviously that's been a discussion point. If players sit out, would they lose a year of eligibility? Would they use a year of their scholarship? I mean, they're debating that they should even have the 6-year athlete, that you can get that 6 year if COVID hit. Because why is it that I should have a year taken away from me, but we have a pandemic going on? So there's definitely a lot here that the players of the Pac-12 feel like need to be addressed for them to be able to go out in the field and feel comfortable playing. And I think as the Pac-12, since you say every conference is basically their own business and league, they need to take this seriously and they need to work with these players and make them feel better so they can go out there. And that way it can lessen any type of tension between the two groups. Because if they don't, this could be a lingering problem. And other college kids from other conferences could be like, well, if the Pac-12 won't do it, how do we know our conference will? If we needed some type of assurances.
Right. And the thing about it is it's so complicated, and it's not always cut and dry, as not all players in the Pac-12 are standing united, so to speak. Other guys were looking around saying, you know what, I'm trying to get mine. And, you know, if these guys don't want to play, they don't have to play. Of course, they've already announced that if players want to opt out of the season, they can, and scholarships will be honored. However, they won't be able to do anything in team facilities or anything like that. And I guess that makes sense, right? In a vacuum. But also, we have to remind ourselves that just because somebody opts out, does that mean that how is their eligibility going to be handled? Do they still have to play X amount of years in college before they get to go drafted? Or, you know, 1 year not playing means that it's another year of you possibly not developing and not being seen by NFL scouts, and you are in college longer making no money. Essentially, you're not making any money, still being opted out in school for a year. And if you were looking to come out in the draft and you're not somebody who was, you know, a big time name already heading into it, what more do you have? Like, Trevor Lawrence has nothing to lose. Trevor Lawrence could not play for a whole year. He could have won the draft last year. He could have won the draft after his freshman year. Nothing to lose. So what exactly is that comparative to the guy who may still be up and coming, who may have had a decent season last year, but really needed this next season to cement himself as a potential NFL prospect, and he won't have it this year? And granted, like I said, they'll be able to honor scholarships and things like that, but how does that work with eligibility? And honestly, how does that work with you being, on track, being able to come in to the league at a reasonable time in your career and not be wasting a year in college? Essentially, you'd waste a year and then you'd have to go play again. So that's 2 years that you're still in school playing, trying to make it to the league. Because I talked about this in my other podcast yesterday, where, you know, a lot of these athletes focus so much on getting to the league that this education aspect of college is secondary, and for the most part, it's not that useful. Because, yeah, a lot of guys don't end up making it to the league, but a lot of guys, especially in Division I, and you get on TV a lot, you are looking at this and saying, here's my shot to make it to the league. And if by their sophomore year they're not seeing the writing on the wall, whether or not they don't have it or they do, to make it, then they are going to continue to push for that dream of making it to the NFL. And with that comes sacrifices, right? You're not going to have a major where you are focusing 100% on that major, because I'll say it right here and right now. I said it on the podcast. It's not even guaranteed for a regular student, not a student athlete, but a regular student, to go get a degree and get a job in their field. It's not guaranteed at that point, because what nobody tells you when you get to college, especially in today's world, it is fully about making connections in order to get to the next step, because anybody with determination enough and some money and capital can go get a degree. Degrees are being valued less and less in our society, because you can go get a certification, you can go get a bachelor's degree in something, but it does not mean that you are the right person for that employer. And unfortunately, that's the case in a lot of different professions and fields. And what takes you over the edge is knowing somebody already in there or having connections. And if you don't have time, or you don't put the time in to make said connections to get in those professions, your degree basically sits on the shelf. And for these NFL players who probably don't put in the time to go get connections for a job they really don't want to go get in the first place, it just seems like a moot point at this point. So I'm getting tired of people talking about, well, you know, they get a free education, they get free housing and stuff. Like, they're not there to do that. They're not there to do it, man. I don't care anymore about it. They're not there to go get a free education. It's nice that it's there, right? It's good. But we have moved past this ideology that getting a free education is all that these players should be happy to have, especially with a lot of them, really not trying to make worth of that education in the first place.
Yeah. And I think one thing also is, we've already had a player opt out of the season, a player at Virginia Tech corner. He's a rejected first-round pick this year. And I said there's a possibility that you could see more players of higher rounds projections opting out because, it's almost – okay, so, obviously COVID can be bad. But, since COVID has those long-term effects, as a player who may be viewed highly in the projections in terms of being a high-round draft pick, you may not feel the point or the need to sit here and put yourself at risk like that. And you're just like, you know what, coach, I'm going to dip because there's nothing here for me. I've already basically solidified myself. It's like what you said about Trevor Lawrence. He solidified himself. He doesn't need to play for Clemson. If anything, it may maybe be a personal competitive thing. Oh, I lost the national championship. I want to get back there and win. But if their season might not even be completed, is it even worth it? If you ain't certain that you can even have the opportunity, yeah, I might as well just train for the draft the whole year and just get ready when time comes. So I think that's also something we have to look out on, which obviously would then potentially, I guess you can say, lower the quality of football if you're seeing the biggest stars in college football say, I think I'm just not going to play this season.
Exactly. And then that's the thing. College football is weird. It's not a united, it's not under one umbrella in the NCAA. They're all kind of their own kind of leagues and the conferences. So people are fans solely of the SEC. Some people are fans of only of the ACC. They don't care. If Trevor Lawrence doesn't play in the ACC, I don't think a lot of fans in the SEC care, right? It's not like they're saying, oh, Alabama's sitting out for the season. Now that would be drastic. And I'm sure that would make national news, of course. But if you are in another league that you care about more than the SEC or vice versa, and somebody did that, you'd be like, oh, well, whatever. We got to still keep playing. So it doesn't matter. And that's the difference between, if the NFL decided to, if somebody in the NFL decided to say, hey, the New York Jets are just not going to play this year, that would drastically change everything in the league. So that's the big difference.
Yeah. So I think it's something we just have to kind of, just keep an eye on, and just stay aware of everything that happens and anything that changes, because there was also a report that the SEC, I don't know, they didn't exactly, say who, but I'm assuming players were on calls with SEC leaders, and some players are coming out of that phone call saying that what they heard in terms of everything they're going to do for the season wasn't enough. So we don't know if that's going to lead to the SEC holding some type of strike. The SEC now, you know how deep it is down here, the SEC out here in SEC country. So if you told these people you didn't get your SEC football, it's going to be some shambles around here in every state that has this SEC team, because that's pretty big down here. But obviously the players are who should come first. And if they're not comfortable, then they're not going to play. And like I said, most people, like most NFL players come from the SEC. So half of them could just be like, you know what? I done did what I need to do. I'm good. Hey, Saint Nick, you got it. you got that new 5-star. You can let him play. I'm going to go ahead and train for the draft. So, there could be an issue on the hands of the leagues if these players decide to speak up and say, we need more for us to play. Because obviously, as we know, the conferences do kind of need the players. Because listen, if you ain't got your players and then you have to ban fans, it's not going to help. They have to cancel the season. You're not getting TV revenue, and college football could be in dire straits for some of these colleges. when it comes to financials if that happens.
Most definitely. We're going to take our final break here, and then we're going to come back, finishing up the podcast real soon on the GSMC.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, GSMC Football Nation, we're back here at the GSMC Football Podcast. Me and Brice, we're ready to wrap it up. So we're going to start speculating what could the NFL do to create its own bubble system. Now, I understand what people are thinking right now. Ethan, the NFL can't do a bubble. 32 teams, 80 people on roster, coaching staff, medical staff, training staff, the facilities, the workouts, the stadiums, where are they going to practice? How can you do it? I understand, right? But there have been ideas passed around that I thought are at least worth talking about. And one of them, I think I want to ask you, Brice, how you feel about it, is the idea of having mini bubbles in different locations in the United States. So, for example, they may have a southeastern bubble that contains a few, maybe 4 to 6 teams, maybe 8 if we're pushing it, teams within a conference, and put them there. And they use a bunch of the local stadiums from the college atmosphere, so like college stadiums and maybe even bigger NFL stadiums to all play in the same region, so it takes travel away for the most part in the vast spread of things.
I mean, I think it could work. Now, I think it would have to be by conference, because I feel like it's the same thing like what the college teams are doing. You got to keep the conference games. So, for the most part, all of the teams in respective divisions are near each other, except the AFC East, because if you know, every team is in the North, Miami's in the South, so that would be an issue. But for the most part, most teams are around each other. So you could do like a conference schedule. If you still allow them to play twice, that's 6 games. So it really just depends on how many games you really want to try to hit. You could do small bubbles in like respective locations. Or you could do it where maybe you only play teams that are within your vicinity. So like, think about it. Like, the Jets and the Giants live in the same city. So it would technically make some sense to have them play within a bubble wherever in the North. And then the teams like up there, like Boston, Buffalo, all of them, they can maybe play each other, maybe an extra team up there. And then maybe in the South, obviously, it's going to be difficult because you have the 3 Florida teams. And then you got, the Falcons, the Saints, the Panthers. And, it's like you have all those teams in that region. So you got to really decide first, what are the numbers? You have 32 teams. So it sounds like you may just have to do 4. You do your 4 divisional opponents and then maybe do 2 non-in-division opponents. Maybe try to hit 8. If you want to try to hit 10 games, 10. But you do that and you just set up remote bubbles in respective locations. So one in the West, one in the North, one in the South, and then one like in the middle, where like Kansas City and all of them are. And then you just have a select teams go to those locations, and then you get through the series of games that you have with every team there. So every team's going to play each other in the bubble. And then the next question would just be like, how do you formulate the playoffs then? I think could you still keep the same format potentially? Because obviously playoffs is going to be a little bit more difficult because now it's just like this is seeding. And obviously, that means a team from another bubble might have to play a team from another bubble. So maybe they'll probably also create bubbles for the playoffs as well. But basically, they're going to have to just keep it step by step in a bubble to make sure that they're limiting contact with players. So I think over a course of an NFL season, you basically play about, I would say, 13 different teams because you play your conference schedule, everybody in your division twice. And I think you have 10 non-conference. Or not non-conference, but 10, non-in-division games. So you're basically playing about 13 teams. So, it can work. It's just, I know the NFL is probably kind of stingy about it because I just think, honestly, I feel like they just don't want to go through the excruciating efforts that it would take. Because remember, if you look at what the NBA did, it took them a month or two to kind of figure out all the details of what they want to do with the bubble. It's not something that you can just come out within a week and say, this is going to be what it is. It's just they're kind of already about to have training camp and the season starting up. It may be a tight fit to try to get a bubble created, but you never know. That might be the best way potentially to accommodate all of the staffs and coaches and everybody who's involved and everything like that.
Yeah, but even then it would just be they just delay the season because if they really care about preserving this season that much, they would just delay it and get the bubble going. Real quick question about the bubble in particular, if it were to happen, would you think that the playoff structure would have to be basically redone because of the lack of, home field advantage? Because a lot of stadiums, a lot of officials haven't really talked about fans yet, whether or not they're going to have some yet. There's still, some people are indecisive. Other people have flat out said they're not going to have fans in their stadiums, right? And some have said they will have a few, but that has to create some sort of unfair advantage, I would assume, unless they're all just going to end up pumping in crowd noise anyway. But imagine you coming from the Jets, right? And let's say the Jets have a miracle season where they end up being really good and their home field advantage is non-existent because they just play in a stadium with no fans. And they go down to the Washington Football Club and they have fans for some reason. And now they're playing with 25,000 Washington fans who are screaming at the top of their lungs the best way they can. And it's just a bit jarring because they're so, it's back and forth. There's no fans to fans. And I feel like the NFL should have just come down and said one or the other. I feel like it's really lame that they're letting each owner decide if they want to have fans or not, because that does and can have a real competitive advantage. And there's no limit, as far as I know, as far as the NFL saying what percentage of fans that you can have at your stadium, I don't think. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, no. I mean, what you're saying, it does make a lot of sense. It's just, like I said, I understand why the NFL gave the teams the power because it takes away the responsibility on them as a league, and then it puts it kind of on the individual team. Where if, let's say, like we know, the Falcons are playing to have fans. If people get COVID at games, they're going to blame the Falcons. They're going to blame Arthur Blank, not the league. So that's why it's just kind of like, how leagues and businesses go. You got to give yourself out sometimes, and I think that may be a way they can give themselves out in that potential situation.
Right. All right. Some quick questions more revolving around the bubble. Do you think that the NFL, they have the money to do anything they really want to, but do you think they could stake some land in a low population area in the United States and just start terraforming and start building football fields around a large mass of land, right? Find some places for these players to stay and just quickly build and manufacture a bubble in like months time, right? So let's say they do that. They still have training camp going on right now, but they basically build a bubble in a month. It would be one of the craziest feats in history. And it would showcase a lot of things about the NFL as far as their power and money. But could they make a bubble where they have like, I don't know, 8 to 10 fields worth of football and see if they can make it happen? Now, of course, they need more fields because there are 32 teams in the NFL and everybody plays at the same time, at least at week 1, right? So if that's the case, they would need 16 fields. But do you think it would be possible to have like maybe an AFC zone and an NFC zone in 2 states or 1 state, and they just are around and they bus ride to different locations depending on the play, and they do it like that? I mean, that's really pipe dream stuff. Probably the logistics are too wild for it, but it's just, a thought experiment. What do you think that would be? Like, it would be kind of like summer camp for the NFL, just on the hugest scale possible.
I mean, I guess it could be possible. It's just, you gotta find a place who's willing to give them that space, and that's a lot of land. Honestly, isn't a soccer field the equivalent of a football field, like in terms of size? Isn't that?
I believe so.
I mean, you could potentially, if you find like a soccer complex that has multiple fields, you could use that potentially. So that way you already have fields, and then you could make extra fields if needed. So that way it can cut down the amount of time. I mean, really, realistically, you just got to plow some land, put some artificial turf down probably, and then draw some lines, boom, and then you got to see, okay, this is for them, this is for them, so we got to put their colors on there and everything. Then you have to decide what you're going to do when it comes to games. Obviously right now, what's the NBA doing? They're having games kind of 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 6 to 8 to 9. You know what I'm saying? You might have to do it like that. Obviously, usually the NFL is like a 1-4. It's 1-4, then 8 a primetime game and stuff like that. But with that, especially if you're doing an AFC and an NFC zone, like you said, maybe you could have multiple games going on at 1 still. You could have multiple games going on at 4 still. But like you're not having like, usually maybe on a Sunday you can have like 6, 7, 8, 1 o'clock games. Maybe you limit it to 4 or 3. And then, usually the 4 o'clock games, if you got like 8 1 o'clock games, you may only have 2 or 3 4 o'clock games. So then you go ahead and then you do maybe 4 or 5 there, and then you may have to do another 4 or 5 at 8 o'clock. So you're gonna have 4 or 5 primetime games. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So, and then they have to do it that way, potentially, to accommodate all of the people and all the teams. So that way, I'm sure they don't want like 10 games going on at the same time. But it is something that they could potentially look into depending on how many fields that they can create. But I think if they found a soccer complex, that would be a good place for them to potentially start. And then also, you got to, like you said, you got to make sure you got to build a lot of stuff. They may have to build them a barbershop like they did in the bubble. They may have to build them things to do. There's a lot more things than just having the field there as well. Because, like, yeah, we have the field, but, like, okay, what else? Like, okay, we have a field here, but what else can we do? Especially if you're keeping them within a bubble.
Yeah. And also, it just wouldn't make a lot of money at all, really. It's just, you would pay the TV deals, I guess, and it would feel like high school football in the sense of aesthetics, but in reality, you wouldn't be making any money off the fans, so it'd be all TV money. The stadium gets no money, so the stadium's just sitting there. So unless you are making events for the stadium, which you probably won't be, there would be nothing, really. So that's just kind of where you would be at, and NFL wants to make money as much as possible in a time frame like this. And I guess that's the toughest part about everything, is that the NFL is still trying to find ways to make money out of this pandemic, and that is all that you can try to do at the end of the day, is try to make some cash and to make it, I guess, as easily and close to football and regular than what you're used to a fault. And that's going to be difficult. And not only the NFL is struggling with this, but so are college football. We don't know what either one are going to do. And it's a challenge that all sports leagues are going to have to go through. The NBA is going to have to figure out what they're going to do for next season, even though the current playoff structure and the restart has had success, and they should be commemorated for that. I said that in my own podcast, that there should be no ceasing of congratulating the NBA on making this work, because now is at least giving other people a idea of what is possible. Because imagine if the NBA didn't do this. We don't know what anybody would be doing, right? We don't know how anybody would think a bubble system could work in the NBA or in the NFL, because the NBA is the only league besides the Premier League and other soccer leagues across the world and the globe that have figured something out for their sport. So, yeah, I guess that's all I have today. So, Brice, any final notes for the podcast?
Oh, no, not really. I think we touched on a lot of good topics, a lot of good discussion today, man. Really, really good stuff.
All right, man. Well, this is the GSMC football podcast today. I'd like to thank everybody for checking in. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on whatever platform you choose. Every comment, every star helps us out, and we would love to hear from you. So come check us out on our social media, our Facebook and our Twitter at GSMC Football, where you can hear thoughts from me and Brice and many others on the GSMC Sports Network. So, yeah, man, have a good rest of your weekend. You'll probably hear from Brice in multiple podcasts for basketball. You'll hear me on Friday for GSMC Fantasy Football, and we'll just keep it rocking. So for Brice, it's Ethan signing out, and we'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.